Hello, can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you to the team, the incredible team, right, sitting up here that's worked so hard to create this meeting of the minds to expand on the conversation of the senses, the human senses. I'm a neuroscientist and sensory designer. I work with organizations from NASA to Nissan, helping enrich environments, products, and places through the senses, in particular through color. So I'm part of a few companies, so grateful to be part of 3 different organizations that work as sister companies. Origami UK, which is our main research company, and that's what we call our sensory playground, where we help organizations of all different types research and understand implicit context. What does that mean for the brain? And how can we start designing evidence-based environments that evoke or elicit different types of outcomes? And that's what this presentation is going to be about. I actually didn't want to use visuals because I want to tap into another part of your brain, listening to sound. The senses are this unspoken code or language that our species speaks. As humans, we have different types of receptors, and it all begins with one signal. Our brain processes over 11 million signals a second. What are these signals? What are the senses? We normally talk about the senses based on organs, right? So based on our eyes, we can see, based on our ears, we can hear, etc. I want to reposition how you think about the senses. These are all signal receptor translators. And we have 5 different types of signal receptors. We have chemical receptors, which is how we smell and taste. We have temperature receptors, which is how we sense temperature and sense touch as well. We can sense vibration and motion, which is where sound comes from. And we can obviously sense light as well as pain. I'm interested in how do we understand the cross-relationship and the conversation that happens between the senses, and how can we use that influence that one sense can have on another to elicit a greater response, to enrich experiences, to gamify our own experiences inside our mind. I work with a lot of retailers, with healthcare environments and hospitals, with car manufacturers. Ultimately, wherever there's a vessel and there's a human, there's a multisensory environment to be enriched. And whether or not we're putting that intention into the environments we design, we're already enriching them or not with sensory elements. Today, we're living in a hyper-accelerated world. And I want, from a show of hands in this room, who has walked into a space in the last 12 months in which you felt some kind of sensory overload? Just raise your hand. Okay, so pretty much everyone. That's the experience that most of us are having in environments. It's no longer a conversation around just neurodivergent communities. It's a conversation around humans. So we are experiencing this hyper-acceleration thanks to the godlike technologies that we're creating. Yet we're still dealing with our primitive predictive brain. So that's where we are looking at using color, specifically to our project here, which is Brainbow. We wanted to understand what relationship does our visual system have with color, and how can we use color to influence the other senses. Now, thanks to the incredible amount of research by one of the most published scientists in the field of colors, Dr. Stephen Westland from University of Leeds, we've been able to build upon that research, combined with the research of the #1 sensory researcher in the world, Charles Spence. And if you don't know his name, write it down, because anything in terms of multimodal design, that's been where the breakthroughs happen. Anyways, we combine these 2 different types of research. Cross-modal, looking at what happens in the brain when multiple sensory stimuli happens and occurs at the same time. At the same time, we're also looking at biomarkers and biosignals and capturing that. So we're in an interesting pivotal moment in terms of science, technology, and art. Where science, right, we use it to validate these responses, to validate the outcomes that we design for. But now with technology, including AR, including VR and some new Web3 tools, we're able to embody these elements. This is what the key to the senses is: personalization. All of us, the senses is perceptual and personal. Same with color. So color is a computation that happens in your brain, not outside. There's actually no color out here. Yes, there are wavelengths, but your brain then reinterprets that information, codes that information, and actually solicits memories and emotions from that information. So I wanted to look at color and strip away the context and use it as a sensory anchor to engage your mind and to create divergent thinking, which is what I call creativity. How can we interrupt whatever kind of pattern of thinking you have in the moment, and how can we use something as simple as color? And then we added some other tools like NLP. We also added tools like binaural sound. And using these different sensory elements to embed context, or at least to create a pathway for you to find context. We've done some incredible research with dentistry offices in Portugal, with the White Clinic specifically, and we were looking at, can we use color to reduce pain perception? The answer is yes. We were able to embed our system, which you'll see just a fraction of today in the exhibition, where we created a colorscape using specific types of wavelengths, which you will perceive as particular colors, but not all of you will perceive the same. And that's the magic about the senses. Yes, we're pretty much 99.9% biologically the same. Yet, the way we process sensory information is really enriched by our life experiences, by the framework our parents give us during our upbringing, and by different environmental encounters. So how can we use this information to elevate design? How can we use this information to empower others through what I call micro-interventions? We're entering this interesting stage in design where experience for experience's sake is not enough. It's almost like experience litter. That's what I call it. Right now, we seek transformation. And the kind of transformation that I believe we need to push for is inner transformation, healing. Now, we have different words for this, from the science community, to the tech community, to the art community. But ultimately, when I mean of healing, I'm talking about how do we strengthen and empower our emotional intelligence, the way we react and respond to ourselves, to one another, to our environment. The fact is, we can use sensory information to entrain the brain to be more susceptible to some of these behaviors. And we found that by creating 5-minute micro-interventions using color that are guided by your color preferences, not by our prescriptive color, we're able to achieve that. So outside of reducing pain and pain perception in a dental environment, we were able to bring that, for example, to hospitals in Canada, exploring how to reduce anxiety with children, particular neurodivergent communities on the spectrum. If this works for on the spectrum community, and if this also works to engage memory recall in the brain without having to go through the hippocampus and directly influence your hypothalamus, that's the kind of implicit context that we're looking to build. The future isn't so much about space and product building, it's about mind building, and building on the framework that each and every one of us have. There are some technologies that are accelerating our ability to deliver personalized sensory experiences, and those are the technologies that I play with. So outside of what we use to capture neural signals or biosignals, we're also using delivery systems. Now, some of these delivery systems are now speaking to one another, and that's the exciting part, because up to this point, most of us with some kind of sensory background or experience have been working in our silos with each one of the senses that we kind of feel comfortable with, but now it's time to put it all together and to fuse it. This is where new multi-protocol systems, multi-protocol I mean engaging different settings, environmental settings that are under one user interface, and new formulas are being created, new recipes are being created. And these are the individual recipes that we're collecting at Brainbook. So outside of providing you a sensory reset, which is our way of saying meditation, but it's an elevated approach for us, we're saying that in 5 minutes we can alter your perception. We can change the way you're thinking and expand your awareness, not just to that moment, but to your own internal thought process. Now, let's take that same application in a different sector, workplace. Today, we're experiencing the mass exodus. And people are not just quitting, they're mass quitting, and oftentimes silently. This is creating quite a gap between corporates, brands, organizations, and us, people. But those organizations are also formed of people. So right now we're working with organizations in the furniture sector, looking at how can multisensory furniture support multisensory environments with architecture. Ultimately, we're systems within systems, and these sensory receptors translate and make sense and bring context to this reality that we all engage in. As we explore new technologies such as augmented reality, such as projection mapping, those are the two ones that I had my eye on. These different types of technologies will enable us to create different types of sensory interactions in collective environments that can be tailored to the individual. This creates the biggest difference for us, because ultimately we've approached the senses as a prescriptive tool. And it will be prescriptive at some point, but right now we're mass scaling it, one recipe for everyone. What technologies like Brainbow are enabling us to do is to connect things like color preferences or sound preferences with about 300 other data points, including temperature, including geolocation, including time of day. All these elements have something to do with that inner communication, that crosstalk that our senses have. One of the conditions that has opened up our minds, and I know some artists here that I see who have been heavily inspired by conditions such as synesthesia. Now, I want to show some examples of how we've used this very, very simple yet complex tool of color. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, color is a computation in our brain. What does that mean? It means that if I show you the yellow in a lemon, the yellow on your phone, and the yellow in a rainbow, and you perceive them all to be the same yellow, it's not. If I go and use a spectrometer and measure that, they're different combinations of wavelengths, yet you perceive it as the same color. We also have certain different types of variation in our visual system, particularly between male and female gender, where about a little around 15% of women are tetrachromats, which means they can see just about double or triple the amount of colors that most of us can see. So it's interesting to see how we can use such a simple element or subsensory element such as color to influence the other senses. I'm going to run through 3 different examples of how we've used color to change your perception. We've used it with flavor. So we worked with Six Senses hotels based on an experiment that we created with Charles Spence at Oxford University, where we did a chroma wine tasting. Basically, we gave you 2 different types of wines, blind testing. We asked our audience to measure and to kind of evaluate the richness, the flavor, etc., across all these different parameters. And all we did was change the environmental setting of the room. In particular, we changed the color of the room. Now, to our surprise, every single person in the study there was quite a disparity between one wine and the second wine. Ultimately, it was the same wine. It's those kinds of experiences that allow people to awaken a little bit more in terms of their sensory knowledge. Imagine if we can take all this data and start creating sensory profiles to be able to personalize these environments. This is what we do for astronauts, this is what we do for car drivers, this is what we do for people. Ultimately, the senses unlock a greater code in language that we're still tapping into and understanding. But it shapes the reality that we're in versus physical, Web3, and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And